Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving into a less glamorous but incredibly brutal aspect of the medieval battlefield. Weapons that didn't just rely on chivalry or shining armor, but on terrifying, brutal efficiency. Behind every victory stood not just brave knights, but the dark genius of weaponsmiths who transformed human fears into cold, hard metal. Let's start with the warhammer, a weapon that embodied this brutal efficiency perfectly. Knights spent small fortunes on their plate armor, believing themselves nearly invincible on the battlefield. A well-crafted suit of armor could indeed turn away sword strikes and deflect arrows, leading many wealthy warriors to think they'd solved the problem of battlefield mortality. But then, someone invented the warhammer, and suddenly, that expensive metal shell became less protection and more of a personal coffin. Unlike swords that would harmlessly glance off plate armor, warhammers focus tremendous force into a small area. One solid hit could cave in a helmet and the skull underneath, without needing to penetrate the metal at all. The physics was brutal, but effective. The energy had to go somewhere, and that somewhere was straight into the knight's brain. Warhammers often featured a wicked spike on the reverse side, turning the weapon into a versatile tool of destruction. Hammer side for crushing, spike side for puncturing. This design versatility made the warhammer a practical solution to the problem of heavily armored opponents. A knight might survive a sword blow thanks to his armor, but the concentrated force of a hammer strike transmitted through the metal would liquefy the tissue beneath. This devastating effectiveness was dramatically demonstrated at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, where English men-at-arms used warhammers to devastating effect against French knights stuck in the muddy battlefield. What made warhammers particularly democratic weapons of their day was their accessibility. You didn't need years of training like with a sword, just enough strength and anger. As armor improved throughout the medieval period, so did the warhammer, leading to a miniature arms race where hammers got deadlier as armor got better. No matter your social status or wealth, your skull was equally crushable when facing a determined opponent with a warhammer. Next, we delve into the flail, a weapon that brought chaos and unpredictability to the medieval battlefield. With its unique design featuring a spiked metal ball attached to a handle by a chain, it was notoriously difficult to predict and even harder to master. The chain created a delay between the user's motion and the weapon's impact, requiring extensive training and heightened spatial awareness. Self-inflicted injuries were common among beginners, to the point that military hospital records across medieval Europe documented numerous injuries sustained during flail training. Even modern experimental archaeologists have confirmed this, with many suffering bruises, lacerations, and even broken bones while attempting to train with replicas. However, the very flexibility of the chain was also the flail's greatest strategic advantage. It allowed the striking head to bypass shields and rigid defenses that solid weapons, like swords, could not penetrate. The chain acted as a force amplifier, creating a whip-like effect that concentrated energy into the flail's head, delivering significant striking power. Tests show it can hit with up to 40% more force than a solid weapon of the same weight. The flail came in many variations, including the standard military single-headed version, multi-chain versions, and even psychological warfare adaptations from Eastern Europe, which used hollow chambers to produce eerie whistling sounds during swings, intended to intimidate enemies before impact. Its danger and unpredictability forced knights to develop specialized tactics to counter flail users on the battlefield. Interestingly, the flail originated as an agricultural tool, a threshing flail, and evolved into a symbol of peasant revolts, most notably with the Hussite forces in 15th century Bohemia, who used it with brutal efficiency against fully armored knights. The flail triggered existential crises on the battlefield, forcing knights to confront a weapon whose movements could not be easily anticipated or defended against. Next, we're focusing on the Godendag, a weapon whose unassuming appearance belied its revolutionary impact on medieval warfare. At first glance, a Godendag appears almost primitive, a stout wooden club with a single metal spike protruding from the end. Nothing about its straightforward design suggests the pivotal role it would play in shifting the balance of power on European battlefields. Yet this simplicity concealed a tactical versatility that made it devastating, even against the most heavily armored opponents. The effectiveness of the Godendag stemmed from its dual-purpose design. The spike could puncture armor or unseat mounted knights, while the heavy club portion delivered crushing blows to opponents once they were on the ground. This combination made it the perfect weapon for foot soldiers facing armored cavalry, a common scenario in medieval warfare. The Godendag's defining moment came at the Battle of the Golden Spurs in 1302. On July 11th of that year, an army of Flemish townspeople and peasants, armed primarily with Godendags, faced a force of elite French knights, the finest heavy cavalry in Europe. What happened next shocked the medieval world. The Flemish militia utterly destroyed the French knights. This battle revealed a harsh truth. Even the most sophisticated armor and years of training could be undone by a determined opponent with the right tool. The genius of the Godendag lay in its application against mounted knights. Flemish fighters developed a specific technique. Brace the base of the weapon against the ground, pointing the spike upward toward an oncoming horse. The charging knight, carried forward by his own momentum, would impale either himself or his mount on the spike. Once dismounted, the knight became vulnerable to the club end, which could crush skulls even through helmets. This simple yet effective design meant the Godendag was cost-effective and easily accessible, allowing entire communities to arm themselves quickly during times of conflict. Its ease of learning also greatly influenced military training, transforming groups of individual fighters into coordinated units capable of standing against mounted knights. The Godendag's long-lasting legacy extends beyond the medieval period, influencing later polearm designs and remaining in use well into the 16th century, proving that effectiveness doesn't always require complexity or expense. Now, let's talk about the Zweihander, a weapon that truly embodied extravagant excess. This enormous two-handed sword dominated battlefields through its sheer imposing presence and the devastating power it delivered in the hands of skilled warriors. These massive swords typically measured between 1.5 to 2.1 meters long and weighed from 3.2 to 6.4 kilograms. These weren't just big swords, they were portable siege weapons disguised as blades. Wielding such a weapon demanded immense physical strength and stamina, making it incredibly difficult to use effectively for extended periods in combat. The Zweihander's use was highly specialized, often by German mercenaries known as Landsknechts. Within their formations, Zweihander wielders received double pay due to the skill and strength required, earning them the title of Doppelsoldner, or double pay men. These warriors weren't just fighters, they were formation breakers, charging directly into opposing pike squares to disrupt their cohesion. The long reach of the Zweihander allowed its user to cut through multiple pike shafts with a single powerful swing, creating gaps that could be exploited by following troops. Pike formations, previously considered nearly impenetrable, suddenly had a counterweapon to fear. The design of the Zweihander also evolved significantly. Early versions resembled oversized longswords, but later models incorporated specialized features for battlefield effectiveness. Most notable was the addition of a ricasso, an unsharpened section of blade just above the crossguard, often wrapped in leather to provide an additional gripping surface for more controlled handling in close combat. Many Zweihanders also featured parrying hooks or flukes projecting from the blade, which protected the user's hands, provided leverage, and could be used to trap and disarm enemies. The sheer psychological impact of facing Landsknechts carrying these enormous swords was immense, often demoralizing opponents before combat even began. The distinctive silhouette, especially when carried upright on the shoulder, created an impression of superhuman warriors. Despite being a specialist weapon due to its extensive training requirements, physical demands, and high material costs, it required high-grade steel and master swordsmiths. The Zweihander remained in active military use longer than might be expected, with documented battlefield deployments continuing into the early 17th century. It found particular use in defending narrow passages like breaches in city walls, where its long reach and devastating cutting power could hold back multiple attackers. Surviving examples often feature elaborate etching and gilded inscriptions, solidifying its status as a symbol of prestige among mercenary companies. As we shift from the sheer destructive power of other medieval weapons, we enter the realm of tools designed not for killing, but for capture and compliance. Enter the man-catcher, a weapon specifically engineered not to end lives, but to ensure prisoners remained both alive and manageable. This seemingly simple device was crucial because, in medieval warfare, capturing an opponent alive often offered far greater rewards than simply adding another body to the pile. Sometimes, killing your enemies wasn't enough. You needed to invoice them afterward. The man-catcher operated on a principle of cruel efficiency. Its basic design consisted of a long pole topped with a hinged metal collar lined with inward-facing spikes or barbs. When placed around an opponent's neck or limb and closed, these spikes prevented escape without causing immediate fatal injuries. Medieval engineers had essentially created a portable, instant prison cell on a stick, proving that catch and release had a very different meaning back then. The economics of medieval warfare made the man-catcher an extremely practical tool. Knights and nobles represented significant financial investments, both in their equipment and in their potential ransom value. A dead knight yielded only his armor and weapons as spoils. A captured knight, however, could bring a fortune in ransom money. Historical records show ransoms reaching astronomical sums, with some high-ranking nobles commanding payments equivalent to several years' worth of a town's tax revenue. Medieval accountants understood that dead knights were a one-time transaction, but live ones were recurring revenue streams. Operating a man-catcher required less brute strength than weapons like the Zweihander, but demanded precise timing and positioning. Users were trained to target mounted opponents, using the pole's long reach to snare a knight's neck or limb, and then twist to unseat them from their horse. Once on the ground, an armored knight became surprisingly vulnerable, weighted down by the very equipment meant to protect them. The irony wasn't lost on medieval soldiers. Your protection has become your prison. The weapon proved particularly effective against helmet designs that protected the face, but restricted peripheral vision, allowing man-catcher wielders to approach from angles their targets couldn't easily monitor. Regional variations existed, with Germanic versions featuring longer poles for safely reaching mounted opponents, while Mediterranean variants incorporated more elaborate catching mechanisms. Man-catchers often required specialized team tactics, with military manuscripts describing formations of 3 to 5 soldiers working together to capture high-value targets. These capture teams became highly valued units, receiving bonus payments for successfully taking important enemies alive. The weapon also found particular favor among forces tasked with urban security and riot control, as its ability to control an opponent without necessarily causing fatal injuries made it ideal for crowded streets. Remarkably, the man-catcher's long-term utility meant it maintained practical use even as battlefield technology evolved, appearing in law enforcement contexts well into the 19th century. Moving from the calculated restraint of the man-catcher, we now enter a realm where mercy was never part of the design. The Morning Star represented medieval brutality, distilled into its purest form, a heavy metal ball covered in spikes, designed to deliver catastrophic damage with every strike. If nightmares could be forged in iron, they'd look exactly like this. Its name comes from its visual resemblance to the planet Venus when fitted with radiating metal spikes, a poetic name for a decidedly unpoetic battlefield function. This particular star didn't grant wishes so much as ensure your enemies wouldn't be making any more of their own. Archaeological evidence reveals the Morning Star's grim effectiveness. Skeletal remains from medieval battle sites showed distinctive patterns of trauma associated with these weapons. Clustered puncture wounds with massive underlying bone fractures. These injuries were notoriously difficult to treat with medieval medical techniques, leading to high mortality rates. The Morning Star didn't just kill. It left a calling card that archaeologists could identify centuries later. While it required less technical skill than a sword or flail, the Morning Star demanded considerable upper body strength to wield effectively. Once mastered, however, it offered devastating returns, particularly against well-armored opponents. Its tactical applications varied. Mounted knights favored shorter-handled versions for overhead strikes, while infantry used longer-shafted variants to clear space or thrust like spears. This versatility made it a surprisingly adaptable nightmare. The psychological impact of facing Morning Star armed troops was profound. Its distinctive profile triggered primal fears, even in seasoned warriors, often used to demoralize opponents before contact was even made. Regional variations reflected local military traditions, with Eastern European versions featuring numerous shorter spikes for lighter armor, and Western European designs incorporating fewer but longer spikes for high-quality plate. Interestingly, its terrifying silhouette became a visual shorthand for brutality in medieval artwork, appearing in depictions of hell and divine punishment. Some even called it the holy water sprinkler, a grimly humorous reference to the blood spray produced when it found its mark. Moving beyond the blunt force of the warhammer and the chaotic unpredictability of the flail, we now explore a weapon that represented a more thoughtful, yet equally deadly, approach to defeating armored opponents, the bec de corbin. Its name, French for raven's beak, perfectly describes its most distinctive feature, a wickedly curved spike designed specifically to punch through plate armor with terrifying efficiency. The bec de corbin belongs to the polearm family, mounted on long wooden shafts to provide reach and leverage. What set this particular polearm apart was its versatile head design, which incorporated multiple weapon types into a single lethal package. On one side sat the namesake spike or beak, curved downward and tapered to a sharp point. The opposite side typically featured a hammerhead for delivering crushing blows. Many versions also included a straight spike extending from the top, allowing for thrusting attacks similar to a spear. This 3-in-1 design made the bec de corbin the medieval equivalent of a Swiss Army knife, though its functions were limited to various methods of inflicting grievous harm. A skilled wielder could alternate between piercing, crushing, and thrusting attacks without changing weapons, responding to different armor types and combat situations with remarkable flexibility. The physics behind the bec de corbin's effectiveness stemmed from simple mechanical advantage. The long wooden shaft, typically 1.5 to 2.1 meters in length, created a lever that multiplied the wielder's striking force. When that amplified force was concentrated into the small contact point of the beak or top spike, the pressure could exceed 1.8 tons per square inch, more than enough to penetrate even the finest plate armor. The distinctive sound made when a bec de corbin punched through plate armor, a high-pitched screech followed by a dull thud, was recognized by experienced soldiers as a particularly bad omen for the recipient. Training with the bec de corbin demanded significant technical skill, requiring months of practice to master due to the weapon's weight distribution. Knights who mastered these techniques became particularly feared, able to defeat heavily armored opponents who might have been nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. This weapon found particular favor among foot soldiers, tasked with fighting mounted knights, its length allowing infantry to strike riders from a relatively safe distance. Its specialized head design could either unseat the knight or deliver fatal blows through armor. Manufacturing a quality bec de corbin required the collaboration of specialized craftsmen. Blacksmiths forged the complex head, while woodworkers selected durable ash or oak shafts. The distinctive silhouette, particularly the curved beak, created an ominous impression, striking psychological fear into knights who had spent fortunes on armor they believed would protect them. Regional variations reflected different military traditions, with Italian versions having longer, more slender beaks for penetrating Milanese plate, and French designs incorporating broader hammer faces. This weapon remained in active military use for an impressively long period, from the late 13th century through the early 16th century, a testament to its fundamental effectiveness against armored opponents. Its unique head design influenced later polearm development and even modern tactical entry tools. While the ballista brought devastating power over long distances, medieval military engineers were simultaneously developing weapons that prioritized speed and accuracy over raw force. Enter the scorpion, a weapon that truly earned its name, quick, deadly, and with a sting you never saw coming. It excelled at precision, making it lighter and more mobile than the larger ballista. This allowed medieval armies to reposition it quickly on the battlefield, responding to developing threats with precisely targeted death from distances that seemed almost magical to medieval soldiers. Originally developed by Roman engineers, the scorpion disappeared during the early medieval period, only to be rediscovered and significantly improved upon during the Crusades. The weapon's key innovation lay in its dual torsion bundles, twisted sinews of animal or human hair, that stored tremendous energy. When released, these bundles propelled a dart-like projectile with enough force to penetrate shields and armor at ranges exceeding 365 meters, 400 yards. Medieval armies basically rediscovered that you can solve most military problems by finding new ways to hurl pointy objects at your enemies really, really fast. The Scorpion was just particularly good at making sure those pointy objects reached exactly the right person at the wrong time. What made the Scorpion particularly feared was its accuracy. Skilled operators could target specific individuals on the battlefield, making it the medieval equivalent of a sniper rifle. Medieval soldiers quickly learned to dread these weapons, as death could come without warning from an enemy too distant to even identify clearly. One moment you'd be shouting orders to your troops, the next explaining yourself at the pearly gates with a large hole where your previous career plans used to be. A well-trained Scorpion team could achieve remarkable firing rates, up to 10 bolts per minute in the hands of elite operators. This combination of rate of fire, accuracy, and penetrating power made the Scorpion disproportionately influential on the battlefield. Military historians estimate that during the Siege of Acre in 1191, fewer than 30 Scorpion teams accounted for over 800 casualties among the defending forces. The psychological impact extended beyond the casualties inflicted. Defenders forced to man walls under Scorpion fire suffered severe morale problems. The knowledge that at any moment an unseen projectile could end your life created what medieval chronicles described as the waiting death, a paralyzing anxiety that undermined defensive efforts more effectively than direct attacks. This psychological warfare aspect made the Scorpion a valuable siege weapon even when its physical damage to structures remained limited. From the up-close brutality of melee weapons, we now shift our focus to the dawn of true long-range warfare. The ballista marked humanity's first serious attempt to solve warfare's oldest problem, how to eliminate opponents who were inconveniently far away. While tools like the bec de Corbin allowed warriors to strike armored foes at arm's length, the ballista extended that reach to hundreds of meters. This massive weapon essentially scaled up the humble crossbow to terrifying proportions, creating a siege engine capable of punching through multiple armored soldiers with a single shot. At its core, the ballista operated on a simple yet powerful principle. It stored energy in twisted bundles of animal sinew or rope, then released it explosively to propel a large projectile. The resulting weapon could launch bolts weighing up to 11.8 kilograms, 26 pounds, at speeds approaching 160 kilometers per hour, 100 miles per hour. These projectiles carried enough momentum to penetrate shields, armor, and even multiple bodies in a single shot. Unlike arrows that rained down in predictable arcs, ballista bolts traveled in relatively flat trajectories at speeds too fast for the human eye to track effectively. Soldiers described the terrifying experience of watching comrades suddenly impaled by massive bolts that seemed to materialize without warning. This invisible death from afar created a unique form of battlefield anxiety. Operating a ballista required specialized training and typically a crew of at least 3 to 5 soldiers. One soldier aimed the weapon while others managed the winding mechanism that tensioned the sinews. A well-trained crew could achieve firing rates of 2 to 3 shots per minute, not rapid fire by modern standards, but fast enough to create havoc in tightly packed formations. These crews developed their own specialized vocabulary and techniques, becoming highly valued specialists within medieval armies. Their status reflected a harsh battlefield truth. A single well-placed ballista could inflict more casualties than dozens of conventional fighters. Size variations existed throughout the medieval period, ranging from cart-mounted versions that required just 2 crew members to massive, fixed emplacements demanding teams of 8 or more. The largest documented examples could launch projectiles weighing over 45 kilograms, 100 pounds, though these behemoths typically fired stones rather than bolts and functioned more like artillery than oversized crossbows. The ballista represented an early form of force multiplication, allowing a small number of soldiers to project lethal power far beyond their individual capabilities. It laid the groundwork for future artillery, forever changing the scope of warfare. If medieval siege weaponry had a royal family, the trebuchet would undoubtedly sit on the throne. This colossal engine of destruction represented the absolute pinnacle of pre-gunpowder artillery, capable of hurling projectiles, weighing hundreds of pounds over incredible distances with devastating effect. Where the Scorpion killed with precision, the trebuchet killed with raw, overwhelming force. At its core, the trebuchet operated on a counterweight system that would make any physics teacher proud. A massive weight, often exceeding 3.1 tons, 7,000 pounds, hung from the short end of a long wooden arm. When this weight dropped, it forced the longer end of the arm upward at tremendous speed, launching whatever projectile happened to be loaded in its sling. This deceptively simple mechanism could propel a 90 kilograms, 200 pounds, stone over 300 meters, 984 feet, with enough force to shatter castle walls upon impact. The power of a trebuchet wasn't just in its ability to throw heavy objects. It was in the kinetic energy it imparted, turning a simple stone into a battering ram that could punch through even the most formidable fortifications. The construction of a trebuchet was a monumental undertaking, requiring vast quantities of timber, rope, and skilled labor. They were often assembled on-site during sieges, capable of raining down destruction day and night. Beyond mere stones, trebuchets were also used to hurl various forms of psychological warfare and biological weapons, including disease-ridden carcasses, beehives, or even the heads of captured enemies, further demoralizing besieged garrisons. The sight of a trebuchet being assembled outside castle walls was often enough to prompt desperate negotiations or surrender. The trebuchet's reign as the supreme siege weapon lasted for centuries, fundamentally changing the nature of fortress warfare. It forced castle designers to build thicker, more sloped walls to deflect impacts and encourage the development of counter-siege tactics. Its eventual decline came only with the widespread adoption and improvement of gunpowder artillery, which offered even greater power and destructive potential. Yet, for its era, the trebuchet was an engineering marvel, a testament to medieval ingenuity in harnessing fundamental physical principles for warfare. From the focused brutality of the warhammer to the precision of the scorpion and the overwhelming power of the trebuchet, medieval warfare was a constant arms race. These weapons, born from human fear and clever design, not only shaped the battles of their time, but also laid the groundwork for military innovations that continue to resonate today. They remind us that even without gunpowder, human ingenuity found terrifyingly effective ways to dominate the battlefield.